And welcome to this afternoon's Forest Stewards Guild webinar on forest management from a landowner's perspective. My name is Christopher Riley, and I'll be your facilitator today. I'm a professional member of the Forest Stewards Guild and also a forester and conservationist with my practice called Sweet Birch Consulting. This webinar is one activity that's funded by a USDA Forest Service landscape scale restoration grant that's focused on increasing oak resiliency in southern New England oak forests. Through this project, we're working with foresters, allied professionals, and woodland owners in the states of Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island on addressing the challenges facing oak woodlands, which are the dominant forest type in the region. But we've had to think outside the box in adapting our outreach and engagement work as a result of the COVID pandemic, as I'm sure many of the rest of you have as well. And this webinar is one example of that. We're trying to flip the usual model and give foresters and professionals a chance to learn directly from the landowners for a change. So with that background, I'd like to introduce our presenters, and I'll start with landowners Bet and Patrick Smith. Bet has degrees in plant and environmental science from the University of Connecticut and the Yale School of the Environment. He worked for decades with the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection on hazardous waste, and also managing environmental programs for major nonprofit organizations, national labs. Meanwhile, Patrick has a degree in anthropology. He was a home repair contractor, and he's been cutting his own firewood and tracking and filming wildlife for a long time. He also used to hunt deer, and they're both retired now, but very active. As you'll see, Patrick's also a writer who just published his second book, which is a novel about an extreme hunt that takes place in the forest. And as you'll see, they're very involved with taking care of their land and sharing what their experience has been like with others. Also participating in the webinar is Bill Purcell, who's worked with Connecticut NRCS, that's the Natural Resources Conservation Service, in the eastern part of the state for 12 years. And he now serves as a district conservationist. And in this capacity, he's worked with Bet and Patrick and many other family landowners. Bill has a degree in natural resources management and engineering from the University of Connecticut. We are offering Society of American Foresters continuing education credits for this webinar. For those of you who are interested, some of these may be useful towards state licenses and other certifications. We just are able to record the time that you participate in the webinar. And if you are able to participate in the full hour, we will get that list to the Society of American Foresters and can get you a certificate if you'd like for state licensing or other purposes. Also, before we get into the presentations, just wanted to point out the chat box, which is like there's a cartoon bubble down in the bar, the bottom middle of the screen. And if you type questions that you may have there, we'll give the presenters a chance to go through their presentations, and then there will be time for Q&A and discussion at the end of the webinar. And we'll ask your questions to them then. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Bet and Patrick and Bill and learn about landowners' experience of forest management in northeastern Connecticut. Thank you.
Okay, welcome. I'm Bet, this is Patrick.
Hello,
and we're gonna kind of put this into 5 sections. One's just about 5 minutes about the woodlands that we own and the history behind it. And then we're gonna talk about what we needed or wanted from a forester, some advice for foresters we could take into consideration, some advice for new landowners, things that we wish we knew when we got our land. And then we'll have questions and input at the end. And I'm gonna just try to use 2 acronyms.
Are we,
What?
is it all working right?
Everything looks great.
Okay.
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 the two acronyms I may use are, or you'll see on the slides, are FMP for our Forest Management Plan and NRCS for the Natural Resource Conservation Service, where Bill works. So we have about 100 acres total in Woodstock, Connecticut, and Woodstock is in northeastern Connecticut, and we purchased the land about 4 years ago. There's one little piece we call Zealandia that's 10 acres on a lake that we actually live on. And then we picked up 60 acres that was going to be a development for 17 houses and protected that. And we donated it to a land trust, but we have life use of it, so we still manage it. But we're going to focus on the fen, which is about 30 acres, and we'll tell you a little bit more about that. But we did have forest management plans developed for both Rocky Hill Refuge and the fen. So the fen, like I said, is about 30 acres, and it's a variety of habitats, and it's got tons of wildlife in it. So there's a big chunk of it that's mostly swamp maple, but we have oak and white pine on the property too. There's wetlands, there's vernal pools that are, go away when it gets dry out, but it's great breeding ground for salamanders and wood frogs. We have about 1,400 feet of frontage on a brook, and there's also a 3-acre meadow. Whoops. Sorry. And this shows the property. There's a 100-acre park here that our property is contiguous with, and this is the lake, the brook that borders the fen, flows into Rosen Lake. Like I said, we have a lot of large white pine, meadow, forest, a lot of ferns, and the waterway. And in terms of the challenges that we face, one of the recent ones was in northeastern Connecticut. We had a severe gypsy moth infestation for 2 years that killed many oaks in the area. We've also gotten emerald ash borer, and we're taking a hit from that. A lot of the pines in our property have been damaged by pine weevil, and then the storms and drought and flooding damage have taken their toll too. But the fen, the property when we bought it, hadn't been touched for 40 years. So when we bought it, we didn't even know what was on there. We couldn't get in because the invasives were out of control. It was like a jungle. And the worst ones were winged euonymus. There's a lot of Japanese barberry, a lot of Japanese honeysuckle, autumn olive, multiflora rose, Asian bittersweet. We have a little bit of everything and a lot of some of it. So this is kind of interesting. It's an aerial view from 1934 and then a current picture from Google Earth showing the changes with the land over time.
Yeah. And you can see on the left here of the black and white, right near the red marker, it looks like those are man-made drainage ditches that follow the line to the right down to the brook. And we have found along the brook, which is a good 500 to 1,000 feet from the roadway, barbed wire in the trees that's all rusted away and grown over, but there's just remnants of it. So apparently this used to be maybe grazing area for the farms.
For cattle. And this is what it looks like today. And as you can see, it's grown back up quite a bit. And this is what the area that we tried to walk through looked like. It took us probably a day to go 100 feet and with chainsaws to try and get around the property and see what we had. So like I said, one of the biggest challenges has been the invasives. It's just so overgrown. And we're also really concerned about Japanese barberry, which is a favored habitat for the deer tick. Populations can be like 40 times higher when you have a lot of Japanese barberry. And another challenge has been wet soils. The purple here shows.
Not me, not me.
This was our main access road. We had to get pulled out of there several times. So that's made it a little challenging just to start with to get in and then to do the work that we wanted to do. But so this shows the brook and these are the wetland soils, but we have dry soils up here. This is where a lot of the pines are. And so one of the first things we had to do was try and create a path to see what was what. And because access was so difficult, Patrick had to chop down a lot of fallen trees, and he had to lug these, what size were these?
6 by 6, 12 to 14 feet.
In to create bridges to go over all the waterways so we could do a circle around the property. So that was one of our first tasks. And in terms of what we're doing with our land, our goals are mainly wildlife habitat. We also have a bow hunter who comes in and does deer management for us. We use it for firewood. A farmer leases the hay field in Rocky Hill Refuge that generates some income for us. We use it for recreation. Rocky Hill Refuge is open to the public. The Fen is not right now. We use it for education. In Connecticut, they have a Walktober program where you can go out with a forester or a naturalist and explore. We get exercise there. It's a place of discovery for us. Yeah, and also we wanted to protect it as open space so it wouldn't be developed. And specifically at the Fen, what we're trying to do is create and improve the wildlife habitat and make it a sustainable forest. Like I said, one of our first tasks was putting in the paths and bridges and getting the invasives under control. We want to protect the riparian zone along the brook because it's impacting water quality in the lake downstream. We had to deal with trash and trespassers, but mainly we just want to explore it and have fun there. And when we croak, we'll donate it to the park that's next door. And one of the kind of fun things about this property is an old 1800s map showed that there were mineral springs on there. That's why we first were interested in it when it went on the market. And people used to come and drink the water and bathe in it for their health. Okay, so the first topic that we were going to hit is what we looked for or wanted or needed from a forester. And when we were picking our forester, we got input from a couple different places. One of them was the New England Forestry Foundation. They offered a free climate change resilience consultation with the forester, who came out and walked the property and made some recommendations about how we could deal with the fact that we're getting more severe storms and flooding and drought, etc. We're also members of the Eastern Connecticut Forest Landowners Association, so we talked with them. We talked with the NRCS and Connecticut DEP, the wildlife section, and we ended up interviewing 4 foresters, and out of those 4, we hired 2 to develop our forest management plans for both the Fen and Rocky Hill Refuge. There were a couple of things that we didn't want in a forester, and these are the types of people that we kind of ran away from. We needed someone who had a broader outlook than just logging because our emphasis was wildlife management. We also wanted someone who was familiar with invasives and native plants. We knew some of them, but we didn't know all of them, and we didn't know what to kill and what to promote. We wanted someone who was interested in incorporating our comments into the forest management plan and wasn't going to ask for more money to do so. And we avoided anybody who had reputation issues. We asked around to people who had used foresters, and we wanted someone who had, people had a good experience with. And we didn't want a plan that was padded with a bunch of unrealistic practices or things that didn't meet the NRCS criteria. So we skipped those people. And these are the things that we did want in a forester. And this is our favorite forester, Eric Hansen from Ferrucci and Malinke. Yes. And he has all these qualities, but I'm going to kind of go through some criteria. And one of them that was big to us is someone who would listen to what we wanted and understood it, and was flexible and would respond to what our concerns were or what our needs were, and also someone who was honest. We wanted someone who knew plants, especially invasives, and what we need to do to promote wildlife habitat. So I've got 3 invasive plants on here for you to look at for a minute and try to identify. 2 of them all 3 of them were new to us, and we didn't recognize them at first until our forester pointed them out. The first one is garlic mustard, very prolific. The second one is glossy buckthorn. Unfortunately, we don't have too much of that, but we definitely want to get rid of what we did. And the third one is an invasive water forget-me-not, Myotis scorpoides, that spreads like wildfire. That one was kind of a surprise. And it's common in wetlands around here. It's very pretty, but it's invasive. Whoops, sorry. Another thing that was really important to us is somebody who had good contacts with contractors and government, and that understood the lingo for the NRCS. And Bill, if you could just kind of chime in here.
Yeah, absolutely. Good afternoon. With NRCS, we require that a forester writes a forest management plan that meets the quality criteria that we have in our it's called our electronic field office technical guide. And a resource concern is a resource condition and does not meet the minimal acceptable conditions as established by NRCS. And so NRCS is looking for a forest management plan that's written to our standard, to any standards or specifications that the state of Connecticut has, because that might be useful for the landowner to maybe get, like in Connecticut, it's called the Public Act 490 tax exemption. It's kind of nice to have a plan that will also be useful for that. But NRCS, we have a vocabulary of programs, of practices. Like for example, we call invasive plant control, we call it brush management. And we have, when we write our plans, we're looking for plans that have useful information that are easily identifiable. Like Beth wrote their current stocking rate, residual stocking rate. Like when we want to look in a plan to see if a practice is a resource concern, if it needs to be addressed, we want to be able to easily find like what's the current stocking rate? Is it overstocked? Is it understocked? What's the residual basal area? Stuff like that. So we're just looking for, NRCS is a little bit of a learning curve to work with, but these are kind of things that we're looking for. And our plan, I'm not sure how many of the foresters on board here are aware of it, but we have what's called Electronic Field Office Technical Guide, or EFOTOG. There's another acronym right there, but that's where we house all our information with resource concerns, other things like that. So it's good to have a forester that understands these things and can work with NRCS side by side. And in the long run, we're just trying to help the landowner and a forester to develop a good solid contract and do a good successful story. So like with Beth and Patrick's property there, we have a good success story of working side by side, working together to meet her objectives that they came up with earlier in the presentation.
And so it was really helpful to have a forester that could translate with us. And that was something that we asked about early on, because we knew that we wanted to look at getting an NRCS grant under the EQIP program, the Environmental Quality Incentive Program. So having somebody who had that experience and understood the vocabulary was really helpful. And also, these were kinds of things that we never could have figured out on our own. And by the way, in this photograph, you can see our winged euonymus, or Euonymus elatus forest, which Connecticut nurseries can still sell this plant, but it is just incredibly, the property was incredibly overgrown with it, and nothing grows underneath it.
Nothing's underneath it.
Which I don't know if there's a phytotoxin coming out of the roots, or if it's because we have the invasive jumping worm on the property that eats the organic matter, but also hardly any birds nest in it, and it spreads like wildfire. Not my favorite plant. Another thing that we needed from the forester was a clear forest management plan with a schedule. And the maps in the plan were really useful to us. This one was one that we carried around in plastic with us that showed the different stands and what we were supposed to do in each area, so we could kind of keep track of the progress that we were making. And this was really valuable. Patrick, you want to talk about this?
Let's see. The language of the foresters. So I'm not that familiar with forestry. So things like stocking and patch cuts and even what a brush pile looks like was all new to me. And I didn't really understand. but I didn't know that I didn't understand. So these things, if I had been more inquisitive about the vocabulary, I'm sure it would have been explained to me. But I think maybe a vocabulary sheet for the homeowner that's actually pertinent to whatever may be happening on their land would be really valuable. Because after it was done, I went, oh, I see what a patch cut is now.
Yeah.
Now I understand.
And we also, like initially I made some brush piles that didn't meet the NRCS criteria. They were just kind of big teepees that collapsed on themselves. And this is a legit brush pile that one of our contractors created that has sort of a crisscross base underneath that the wildlife can run through and then brush on top. But we didn't know that when we started. We didn't know what order we should do things in, like the fact that we probably should wait to make some brush piles until the thinning was done because they were going to create a lot of brush. We didn't know how to write a contract for somebody to come in and do work. It was helpful to us to get suggestions from our forester and from other mentors that we had about what kind of tools to use. One of the things that we didn't get for the first couple of years was an electric chainsaw, which is like super handy dandy. It's lightweight and it's quiet and it makes working as we walk around the fence so much easier, although I'm not allowed to use it because Patrick's afraid I'll chop his head off. Another good suggestion we got was to use crossbow. It's safe for grazing animals and honeybees, but it will pretty much kill everything but grass. And so we ended up using that in the early spring, and it wiped out the barberry. And then the last thing we looked for from a forester was someone that we wanted to work with, that was likable, and that, you know, we could count on.
Okay, wait a second.
Oh.
Can you back that one up? Oh, the issue that I in particular was sensitive to was the wildlife of the area. What was this management plan how was it going to affect the wildlife? When we first bought the land, I was a little disappointed because it was so wet. And those bridges I built first half a foot off the ground, and then they flooded. So I built them a foot off the ground, and they flooded. But as we cleared the paths to the bridges, the wildlife that showed up, oh, it was so impressive. Every kind of species of New England, it seemed, was using the bridges. So I was afraid that if we interfered too much in the wrong way, that it would affect the wildlife that was using that land. And our guy, Eric, who's in this picture, was very sensitive, big ears, and listened to our main concerns. It was very encouraging and emboldening. Is that the word? Emboldening. Okay, we'll go forward with this.
Okay, so now we have some advice for foresters, things that you might want to keep in mind. And one of them is, you know, we talked about a little earlier, writing a plan with NRCS in mind that does a couple things, that incorporates the landowner's comments if they have them, that has good maps. Those were super useful to us. We needed a key with the tree thinning markings because we wanted to look at, you know, after they did the marking for us, which trees were going to be gone and which were going to be left behind. And we did some of the work ourselves in the patch cut, so we needed to know what the intention was there. The practical recommendations were really helpful. And just a future reference, please don't pick the wettest part of the property for patch cuts and thinning, because all of our contractors got stuck when they were doing their work. Unfortunately, the ground never froze a couple of years, so they didn't really have a solid base to work on with their heavy equipment. Another thing that's useful to the landowner is to provide us with cost estimates, because we really had no idea what things were going to cost. How much it would cost to prepare a forest management plan, what it would cost to mark the trees. We used the forester to show the property to the loggers who bid on it. And I think it's good not to go over the cost estimate, or to at least, you know, let the landowner know, you know what, actually this is going to be more for whatever reasons, and to stay in touch. To touch base periodically. And they were also really good about hounding our contractors to get them to show up. Another really useful thing that we got from our forester is recommending 3 reliable contractors for each job. we had no equipment of our own. Patrick has a little Honda lawnmower that we use on the paths, and our electric chainsaw, but we didn't have any big machinery. So one of the things we needed to do, you saw that picture earlier with the wet road, is have somebody come in and create an accessible logging road for us. And one of the really useful things we got from NRCS is they had their engineers come out and draw us detailed specs for the road. And then we had 3 contractors come out, we showed them the specs and asked them to bid on it. And we were shocked that the bids ranged from $6,000 to $12,000 for the exact same job. So, that was an eye opener. Having loggers come out, somebody that the forester had experienced, that they knew that they were going to leave a mess behind, and that they would, only take the trees that were marked, and that, somebody who knew what they were doing. We ended up picking Tom Walker, who was fantastic. He's done a lot of work with the Yale School of Forestry, and we were just so comfortable and trusted him so much in terms of what he was doing. The other contractor that we ended up using for the patch cuts was TR Landworks, Ted D'Onofrio, and these are his big honkin' Megatron machines. He has like $500,000 worth of equipment, and he came in, and the work that he did in 2 days was more that we could have done by ourselves in 2 years. So it was fantastic. So having access to those people was really a big bonus for us. Bill, did you want to say anything here?
It's useful for it's useful to provide the landowner with like some contractors, because you can't just look up it's hard, you just can't tell them to go look in the white pages of the phone book. So I think it's useful for like Bet and other landowners to maybe suggest a few names for them to call and give them a place to start.
The NRCS could give us lists of people who are licensed to do things, but they can't recommend anybody. So that was useful. And by the way, our forester came in, he wrote his cost estimate on the back of a napkin, literally, and he came in within $5. And he did some extra work for us while he was there too. So we were really impressed with that. Another thing that I think is really useful is for landowners to show them before and after pictures, like what a patch cut and a thinning is going to look like to manage expectations. And one document that would have been useful, I think, for us to see is this one by Maine, what will my woods look like? And that I have some before and after pictures that I'll show you, but I think that is useful. And Bill, did you want to say something there?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest things I get from feedback from landowners is they don't understand or know what it's going to look like. And I don't like getting angry phone calls after the job starts saying, Bill, what the hell are you doing on my property? So I think it's good to manage expectations and just explain, like, this is a patch cut. This is what it's going to look like. It might look like a bomb went off for a couple years, but that's how you're going to get the really thick regeneration we're looking for the future wildlife habitat. So I think it's, us professionals in the business every day, we talk the lingo, we know what things look like, but sometimes we need to take a step back and realize, when we're talking about the landowner who might not be as educated as us about things, that we need to step back and take it down to their level and explain maybe show them pictures of what it's going to look like, or explain to them, this is what we're looking at. These are the trees we're going to take down. These are the trees that are going to go. So we got to keep that in mind. Like NRCS, professional foresters, I think sometimes we forget that. And afterwards, you kind of see that you probably should explain things better. So if you can explain that to the landowner up front and be like, I'm proposing a patch cut. This is what it's going to look like. And then see what they say. And I think, that's going to be really beneficial to them.
Yeah. And also, from our personal experience, even though it was explained to us, and there were no pictures shown, but afterwards, if the landowner is used to walking through the woods and you do a patch cut and the trees are left to lie and the trees are blocking the path, well, that's going to cause aggravation. So I think at the very beginning to ask, so if we do this, Mr. Smith, are you going to want a path at the very end cleared for either a truck, ATV, or a walking path? Because the other day I tried to get through one and I didn't have a chainsaw because the trees were in the way from the patch cut. So anyway, I thought that was a good recommendation.
Well, that was from the thinning, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Penny.
This was the patch cut before and after. And, you know, when we talked to our contractor about this, it was just really hard to envision what it was going to look like afterwards. And he did say, you know, we told him, like, we want to leave a snag in there for wildlife or whatever. But we talked to him about we need to be able to get in there and walk through it to spray invasives that start popping up. So it needs to be walkable. But that was quite a dramatic difference. This is the difference before and after the thinning in this area, and this is where it used to be really easy to walk through, and it's a little trickier now. We had to redefine the path, and one of the lessons learned for us was maybe to, while the contractor's there, have them create a new path for us. Because when the thinning was done too, another thing that we didn't realize is it was going to change the water flow. So wet spots showed up where they never were before. And it took a while for it to dry out too, until the stumps started, you know, sucking the water out. So just to kind of recap the advice for foresters, write in a plan with the NRCS in mind if the landowner is going to pursue a grant, providing cost estimates, having access to, you know, reliable contractors for each job, and showing the before and after pictures to manage expectations, I think were probably the main things.
Mm-hmm.
And then here's some things that we wish we had known when we got our property, so it wouldn't have been as much of a surprise. And one of them was, if you're looking at land, walk it and get a sense of what management's going to be needed for what you want to do. And for us, a biggie was looking at how bad the invasive situation was for, you know, a property who had been untouched for so long. And the other thing that really was worth its weight in gold was hiring a really good, experienced forester that could relate to us. And we interviewed him, you know, we walk your land together. And I really want to encourage people to consider getting an NRCS grant. Especially for things like improving the timber stand and brush management. If we had not had a forest management plan prepared and we had not gotten this grant, I don't think we never would have done some of the things that we ended up doing that I think are going to be really valuable for wildlife habitat in the long run. And we wouldn't have done it on the schedule that we had to, and we would have had to pay for it all ourselves. And with the cost share from the NRCS, it ended up, you know, picking up about 60 to 75% of the cost, which was a tremendous boon for us. But Patrick and I had quite a few discussions about doing this beforehand. And what were your reservations, Patrick?
No federal government. I was very hesitant, and I was proven absolutely wrong in my hesitations. Waste of time. It was fantastic. Seamless, actually. Yeah. It was really seamless.
And it was a partnership, and we got, you know, free technical assistance and funding to achieve our goals. Patrick was concerned too about the paperwork, but having worked with the government for my entire career, I knew what was involved, and it wasn't that bad. And they do come out and check everything, as they should, before they release the funds, and that was fine. So. And the other thing is, I'd recommend doing before and after pictures of your property, because it's kind of fun to see, and it's actually hard to remember what it looked like even just 4 years ago and how much it has changed. And it's exciting to see the difference. And also, you know, Google Earth, depending on the location, they only update it over a couple of years, but just getting a picture there to, before and after to see how different it looks.
And part of the unique quality of doing something like this is whenever we clear land like this in Connecticut, it's usually to put a parking lot in or a mall or something like that. But this is a totally different approach to, okay, we're going to clear the land and then let it come back. It's a fun experience to see what happens when it's leveled and then nature takes over again. It's really interesting and enlightening.
Yeah.
To see what happens.
And another thing I'd recommend is get ready for climate change and insect pests, because they are going to make a difference on your property. I mean, the more frequent, more severe storms have taken down so many trees. And here's an example. The last storm took down this 80-foot oak, which of course landed right in the middle of our access road. And this is, you know, it's an oak that was still alive, but the gypsy moss took a toll on it, and maybe, you know, the thinning heads around it took away some of the support. So things like this are going to be more and more common. Another little piece of advice we have for new landowners is to do what our forester recommended, getting 3 quotes and interviewing the contractors and checking their references, because we definitely got a feel for which ones we wanted to work with and were most comfortable with from that. We didn't go with the cheapest. We went with the person who understood what we wanted to do and could accommodate us and had the right equipment. And also, the more you can do yourself, the cheaper it is.
Oh God, yeah. But most people probably are not retired, are working, and will not have time to do this. So it's hiring the contractor is like those people who are working, hiring a contractor to redo your bathroom or you know, renovate your house. So you want somebody who has access to the best subcontractors, who's punctual, who's proven. It's the same principle. But of course, even when you're doing that, if you can put the roof on yourself, you're going to save a lot of money. But most people can't do that.
And the contractors that we did hire, like I said, saved us a lot of time. And we had a problem in the beginning. We hired a contractor who was very good. It was someone that, you know, we heard of through connections, but we couldn't get him to come back and finish the job. I called him for 1.5 years, and he wouldn't show up. He was too busy. And the people that Eric recommended to us, they were there, they were on time, they got the job done exactly for what they said it was going to be, and you know, they charged us what they said they were going to, and they were amazing. Another thing I'd recommend for new landowners is having the right tools. Like I mentioned, the electric chainsaw that Patrick got, and he's going to get an extendable pole saw next. I got this thing called a jaw saw. You can't chop your legs off with it, but I can cut down a 4-inch diameter euonymus, and that saved me a lot of time. This is something I wish I'd known about early on. The buckthorn blaster was invented by a woman, and it's a sponge applicator, and you put 20 to 40% strength herbicide in it and some dye, and after I would cut the stumps, I'd treat them right away with the buckthorn blaster to prevent regrowth, because with plants like euonymus and autumn olive, they're like, thank you very much, I will come back like bigger and stronger after you chop me down. So if I didn't do this, I'd never get this under control. Another favorite tool I have is my backpack sprayer that has a battery in it, so I don't have to pump it, and I can put 4 gallons in there and cover a lot of ground. And the nozzle is adjustable, so I could spray things far away or do a broadcast spray, and that saved me a ton of time. So, and Patrick's commercial weed whacker really comes in handy too for the making the pass, although it is heavy to lug around. Another just lesson learned or piece of advice for new landowners is create paths so you can use it. And if you're building bridges, maybe think about the kind that you can drive a lawnmower or a brush hog over. Ours are too narrow because of the access, but and it's amazing how much wildlife uses the bridges that we put in.
Everything but deer will walk across those bridges. The deer, I think it's because it's plastic wood, recycled plastic. It's too slippery for the deer, but every other critter, from weasels and minks and turkeys, bobcat, everybody else uses it.
Yeah, and keep learning. Participate in seminars, hook up with other people who are doing the same kind of work that you can learn from each other, read, and just get out and explore your land. We go out into the the fen probably once or twice a week. We don't have to worry about coronavirus. And Patrick has 8 wildlife cameras out there, and the things that we've seen on there are just incredible. We would have had no idea what kind of wildlife was out there and what they were up to without the cameras. So every weekend we have Saturday night at the movies, we go out and collect the cards and watch them. And sometimes you have to watch 1,000 videos of a squirrel bouncing around, but we've really seen some incredible things. So I highly recommend getting a wildlife camera. And share your property with others. The paths come in really useful. We've done Walktobers every year, and a lot of people come back year after year to see the progress that we've made and how things are changing. And the New England Forestry Foundation sponsored our Walktobers and had our forester come and lead the talks, and that was, people love it. And consider protecting your land as open space for future generations. If you don't, if it's not in writing, you have no idea what's going to happen to the property when you're gone. We have a lot of large parcels in our town, over 100 acres, and the owner's kids don't live in town, and when they're gone, it's going to become a subdivision. If you want it to stay the way it is, you have to protect it. And it's not for everyone, but like I said, with Rocky Hill Refuge, we protected it, it's open to the public, but we can do whatever we want there. We'll probably plan a thinning in the next 10 years. With the fen, it's private right now for liability reasons, but we bring people out on tours, and when we're gone, it'll be open space forever, and we're going to leave an endowment with it too, so that it can be maintained, because we don't want all our hard work to go to waste. And then this is my last recommendation for everybody, for government people, foresters, landowners. It's to protect yourself from ticks. I am shocked when I see people come out into the woods in flip-flops and shorts, and they just have no protection against ticks. In our area of Connecticut, 42% of ticks are infected with at least one organism. We have Lyme disease, of course, but we also have ehrlichiosis, anaplasmosis, babesiosis, and new species of ticks are spreading as a result of Lyme climate change.
This is bet at 102. With what 2 did you have then?
I had ehrlichiosis. Oh no, that time I had Lyme disease and anaplasmosis at the same time. And I ended up in the hospital for 3 days on an IV.
That's an antibiotic IV.
So after that, I learned my lesson. Well, after I had Lyme disease 7 times and ehrlichiosis once and anaplasmosis twice, I figured I had to do something. So I take 1,000 milligrams of garlic every day. I spray with a strong DEET. I know not everybody's comfortable with that, but I think it's better than getting a disease that can have long-term impacts. I use permethrin impregnated clothes, my jacket, my pants, my socks, and my gaiters. I think the socks and the gaiters are really key. And you can wash them 70 times and they still have repellent properties, but I never wash them because I don't want to have to keep track of you know, how many times they've been washed. And then our dogs have Seresto collars, and they've never been bitten by a tick. And Bravecto is another good product for protecting your dogs, because you don't want them bringing the ticks home and then laying on your bed. So I just want to encourage people to avoid getting bitten by ticks. It's it can really be a nightmare. And lastly, we are going to be doing a another webinar on October 3rd, 2020, with Eric Hansen's going to talk about the projects that we've done, and you can pre-register for that through a Zoom link. And we have a website, well, a Facebook page at facebook.com/FenCT, where you can see a lot of our wildlife videos, the best ones, not the squirrels jumping around, like our little baby bobcat. We have some grumpy otters that come by, a lot of variety. It's really surprising and fun, and we get to see some unusual behaviors too. So we put the videos up every week, and you can see those on Facebook. So I guess now it's time for questions and input.
Thank you, Bet and Patrick and Bill, for that great presentation. You know, your enthusiasm for the being out in the land and your property, really comes through, and how you've learned all along the way, and appreciate your sharing these experiences and tips with foresters, other professionals, and landowners who are out there. And Bill, for your perspectives on helping everyone understands, how NRCS works, and how foresters can partner, both with the landowner and to work with NRCS. We've had a couple of questions come through in the chat pod, and encourage the rest of you to add more if there are any that you're thinking of, but I'll start addressing some of these. I think one of the questions addresses rare or unusual plants on the property. Please, you can correct me in the chat pod if I'm wrong, but if you're aware of any rare plants or those requiring protection on your property, Bet and Patrick, and how what you've learned about those and how you've addressed that.
Good question. We actually checked the Natural Diversity Database with the Connecticut DEEP as part of the development of the Forest Management Plan. And there's an endangered, locally, I don't know if it's endangered or listed, wood turtle, and there were also some snails. Both of them were associated with the brook. So one of the concerns that we had about the snails is we didn't want to increase sedimentation. So we've worked to try and provide a riparian buffer to keep plants along the edge of the brook, so that a lot of sediment and erosion doesn't end up in the brook and interfere with the snails. And that was an issue because we were cutting down a lot of invasive plants that were all along the shore. So we had to, encourage natives to come in and hold the soil in place. There hasn't really been a lot of work to look for plants in our area. Woodstock is a really big town. It's actually 62 square miles. It's the second biggest town area-wise in Connecticut. And we don't know if there are endangered plants there, but we have had a couple naturalists walk through with us and help us identify some weird things. But we haven't found anything yet that needs to be protected. And if we did, we would, do whatever we could to protect it. I mean, we've tried to be really careful too with invasive control to do as much as we can mechanically. And when we do use herbicides, to do it really targeted, like treating the stumps instead of doing a broadcast spraying. And to use, again, pesticides that, I mean, I went to an invasive plant seminar and they were talking about Japanese knotweed. And they suggested that you go and you cut each stem and inject it with a pesticide individually. And, whoever wants to do that either has 10,000 volunteers, or they have a quarter of an acre that's infested. You can't do that on a 30-acre property, but we have tried to, protect all the native plants that we find, and encourage them to take over now. And we're already seeing it. Even after only 4 years, we're seeing improvements there.
Thanks. That's helpful to learn specifics of, some of the species that you're aware of on your property, what information is available from the town and the state, and then, the general approaches that you're taking. Just shifting gears a little bit, I got another question from Michael Leff, who's a forester and arborist in Western Massachusetts. And he is asking, did or does your forest management plan provide any guidance anticipating climate change?
Yes, it does. When in the Rocky Hill Refuge, the forest management plan recommended how to control runoff to keep the paths from eroding, the logging road. What else was in there?
I don't remember. Expect more flooding.
Yeah, and how to deal with that. I mean, the work that we did with the thinning was designed to make the trees stronger so that they could withstand the storms, to let them spread out a little, because a lot of them were really crowded. So they hadn't really developed big crowns or anything. So those were probably the main things. There's more in there, but I can't remember right
Yeah.
now what it was.
Thanks. Well, it's certainly evolving subject, in which we're all, learning more about it at the same time, and, may, play a bigger role in, forest management plans in the future. But, clearly you guys are on the vanguard and, working with Eric, getting input from others and incorporating some of these things into your plan. Got another question here from Frank Servo in Eastern Connecticut. What was your experience with permanently protecting your property like? Was it a easy or an arduous process? Were you able to make it financially work for you?
Well, it's interesting. The fen will be easy because we're probably going to put a conservation easement on it, and then we've already talked to the Board of Trustees for the park about donating it, and we're just going to put it in our will, and our attorney will write up a deed that restricts what kind of activities can take place on the property. Because if you donate land to someone, you don't put restrictions in there, you don't know what they're going to do with it. I mean, they could sell it, they could develop it if they need funds in the future. So we're putting controls in place for that, and that's going to be fairly simple. The experience with Rocky Hill Refuge was extremely difficult.
Disastrous.
What happened there is, for those 60 acres, it had already been subdivided into 17 lots. So we had to recombine all the lots, and we had to go to planning and zoning for probably a year and a half.
Because nobody had ever, legally, it had never been done before, if I remember correctly, to undo a subdivision.
And then protect the whole property.
Yes, the legal language wasn't readily available. Somebody had to come up with it.
And we had to jump through a lot of hoops with planning and zoning. And if we hadn't been as determined, I don't know if it ever would have happened. They told us it would be, what we wanted to do, they told us was impossible. And we had a really good attorney, and the guy that we were buying the property from stood by us the whole way and helped make it happen. And so that was interesting. But in the end, the language that we put in to the deed was very helpful, because it gave us, again, life use to do whatever we wanted to manage the property sustainably. We can go in and thin, we can go in and manage for invasives. I put a provision in there that I didn't ever want the property used to grow marijuana, because I'm not a fan of drugs, and I knew that was coming our way. We put a provision in there that the property could be used for agriculture, but that it couldn't be used for other purposes, and forestry is part of agriculture. But once we got through undoing the subdivision,
It was fine.
I mean, there were all these weird things, like there was a road that had been developed that was deeded prematurely to the town, and we had to undo that. That took like 6 months. But normally it wouldn't be that hard. You just have to decide. Oh, the other thing that took a little while is we interviewed who we wanted to donate the land to. So we had 3 land trusts come out. And one of them, initially we thought we were just going to do a conservation easement. And a lot of the land trusts don't want conservation easements anymore, because it's a lot more work for them. They have to monitor it, and they wanted the land donated outright. So we ended up donating it to Wyndham Land Trust, because they were the best fit for what we wanted for the property. They were going to let us open it to the public. They would help us with any issues we had. They had the liability insurance. The other one we had looked at was Eastern Connecticut Forest Landowners, and they were more interested in demonstration forests. So it wasn't an ideal fit there. But picking the right land trust to work with and having a good attorney who knows how to write the language for the deed restrictions, I think was key.
Thanks. That's helpful. A lot of good points there, and interesting to hear about the the varying experiences, between the two properties. So, participating in the webinar is the Smith's forester, Eric Hansen, whom you've heard a bit about, during the course of the hour. And I believe that he has a few additional thoughts to share on climate change adaptation, having, worked with them on developing the plan. So Eric, we'd love to hear additional thoughts that you have about that and working on this property.
We're always interested in hearing what Eric's thinking, what he recommends, so.
Well, thanks for, first of all, thanks to Bet for inviting me and reminding me that this webinar was happening today. I also really appreciate all the unreasonably nice things you said during this webinar. I wanted to just follow up really quickly about that question about climate change stuff as it related to the management plan. Bet and Patrick are kind of unique. Well, they're very unique in a lot of ways, but their property and the planning process was particularly unique because they first had the climate change assessment done through the New England Forestry Foundation grant first. So they got a kind of climate change specific set of information and recommendations on how to proactively adapt with that particular report. Secondly, in the management plan, one of the things that we had talked about besides erosion control, invasives control, and things like this was the fact that this is a wet property. And so we kind of intentionally, when we were talking about the thinning, we intentionally left the number of trees, or the stocking, if you will, a little bit higher than we normally would if this were high and dry. Clearly, based on the picture that Bet and Patrick had shown you with the oak blown over, there's not necessarily any silver bullet, nor any plan that is foolproof. We would have thought that that particular oak, which was one of our one of the trees that we had intentionally left for a variety of reasons, would have had the root system to be able to withstand. But with the relative intensity of the storms that are coming through, I think we're going to need to start thinking about site-specific adaptations and mitigation of how we approach our traditional management strategies. So with that, I'll stop talking, but those were three things that I wanted to just kind of help explain.
Thanks, Eric, for sharing those thoughts. I think this is a good example of how the dialogue between the landowner and the forester, and how you work together and coming to approach a particular issue and then working through it. At this point, we are up at the top of the hour here, so we're going to conclude the official part of the webinar, though we do have time to stay on to answer additional questions that people would like to ask, but it is just coming up right on 2 o'clock now. Just a reminder for those of you who need or are interested in Society of American Foresters CFE credits, which can be useful for state licensing and other certification too. If you need a certificate, if you could email Amanda Mahaffey at amanda@forestguild.org, I believe, and we can make sure that you get that. But thanks to everyone for participating. But if you have time to stick around, there are another questions or two that came up, and while we're all here, I wanted to to take the time to address those. So thanks to everyone as we're at 2 o'clock right now. But I did see a question come in this time from Ada Snodgrass, I believe, about managing Japanese barberry, that very aggressive woodland invasive that will grow under a forest canopy, unlike some others. And what have been the most effective ways that you've found for managing that species?
That's a great question. And actually, one of my major goals was to eradicate all the barberry on the property. Partly because of, it makes ideal tick habitat because the mice like to hang out underneath it, but also because it's no fun to walk through. So we went to a seminar that was given about using flamethrowers, and I really wanted one, but Patrick said no.
No.
Because you have to wet the property around it, and actually it's kind of big to lug around. It's very effective though if you go out in the winter and you fry the base until it starts to glow. That will kill it. But what we ended up doing was we went through and Patrick weed whipped it, and then I went in the early spring as soon as it started to get green and nailed it with crossbow. With the sprayer. And unfortunately, well, actually early in the season, it's kind of easy to identify the invasives because they seem to be the first things that get green. And so I was able to spray that without hitting anything else that was growing. And one application just completely wiped it out. It killed it 100%, but you got to do it when it's actively growing. Crossbow is available. You don't need a pesticide applicator's license. You can get it from Home Depot or I buy mine online, and it was very effective. But then afterwards, you got to go through and again clear it because the stumps and the prickers are all still left behind. So that was super effective for us.
Yeah.
I mean, you could try and pull it up or something, but it's got multiple stems and it's really hard.
To know how that's worked out well for you. And finally, unless there are additional questions that come in, I wanted to ask you guys, have you undertaken all the invasives management work on your land on your own, or has that, have you worked with contractors on doing some of that as well? Or how did you decide how to go about that?
That's another really good question. We did all the spraying I did myself. And I wear a full face respirator, Tyvek suit. I want to minimize my exposure, whether it's crossbow or triptychlorid. But when Ted D'Onofrio came in from TR Landworks and did the patch cuts, he wiped out all the invasives there. And when our thinning guy, Tom Walker, came in, he actually pulled up a bunch of giant euonymus while he was doing the thinning and got rid of it, and then helped us, with our brush piles. The brush piles that we've ended up from the euonymus are like, 20 feet high.
Yeah, but it was more or less incidental. It's not like we hired somebody specific to who was a specialist in some sort of invasive control.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Because that can get kind of pricey.
Because Bet is now pretty specific
Yes.
and pretty well educated about who's who and what to do about it.
And we wanted to make sure to save all the natives around it so they could come back in and take over. And sometimes I think when people come in and do, when you have somebody else come in and do it, they just kill everything. I've seen that on a couple properties. So we were very selective.
Well, thanks for talking about how you've done and approached that. I think that that's a quandary for quite a few landowners. They're not too many landowners that'll undertake commercial logging or real road building on their own, but invasive control is something that some people could take on, but it's important just to to consider the the challenges and the rewards and the pros and cons. So that's helpful.
And for us in the beginning, it did feel really overwhelming because there was so much out of control invasives. And now after 4 years, I'd say we've gotten 75% control. you have to do it for 3 years in a row to really hit it hard. And then after that, you've got to maintain it or it's just all going to come back. So, but it was worth it because it really looks different now.
Yeah, I think that is one of the take-home messages of needing to sort of pick and stick with your battles and get something else to come into that growing space, or you're just going to continue to fight it. Well, at this point, I think we are going to conclude the webinar, which I think has been a great success. Hearing from Bette and Patrick Smith and Bill Purcell. I just wanted to, before we leave, remind those of you who may be interested of the webinar that Patrick will be doing as part of the Last Green Valleys Walktober series this year. I think this is a virtual tour, but he's going to talk about his use of wildlife tracking and wildlife cameras, and I think that sounds really interesting. I'd like to tune in myself if I can. But again, thanks to our presenters so much for sharing your experiences and professional expertise today, and for everyone for tuning in and participating and asking some good questions to contribute to the dialogue. But thanks so much, and hope you all have a good afternoon, and love to see you at another Forest Stewards Guild's webinar or learning about oak resiliency in our southern New England forests. Thank you.
And thanks for listening to us blather and for hosting us. It was interesting and thought-provoking for us too to kind of recap everything.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.